The crack of gunshots shattered the quiet morning as Willow Davis pressed her back against the weathered barn wall, her heart pounding like a stampede through her chest. The life she'd built over the past 6 months in the small town of Redemption Creek was crumbling around her, just like every other time she tried to outrun her past. Only this time, someone was standing between her and certain death. Dust swirled around the tall figure of Yates Irving, his weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes as he faced down 3 armed men advancing across her property. The sun glinted off his revolver, steady in his hand as he planted his boots firmly in the dirt. "Mrs. Reynolds belongs to Mr. Reynolds," the lead gunman called out, using the name Willow had been desperate to escape. "Step aside, cowboy. This ain't your fight." Yates didn't flinch. His voice carried across the yard, steady as iron. "She doesn't belong to anyone, and they'll have to go through me." Willow's breath caught in her throat. She'd only known Yates Irving for 4 months since he'd started working at the neighboring cattle ranch. He was just a kind stranger who sometimes helped with repairs around her small homestead. Now he was risking his life for her, and she couldn't understand why. The year was 1876, and in the Montana Territory, justice often came from the barrel of a gun rather than a courtroom. Charles Reynolds, the husband she'd fled from in Denver, had finally tracked her down. And as she'd always feared, he'd sent his men to bring her back dead or alive. "Please, Yates," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her from where she hid. "Don't die for me." The standoff stretched tight as a bowstring. 3 against 1 weren't odds any sane man would take. But there was something in Yates Irving's stance that gave the gunman pause, the calm confidence of a man who'd faced death before and hadn't blinked. "Last chance," the lead gunman said, his hand hovering near his holster. "Mr. Reynolds pays well for those who help him. He pays even better for those who bring back his wife." Yates shifted his weight slightly, his voice carrying across the yard. "And what does he pay for those who harm her?" The question hung in the air for a moment before the first shot rang out. Willow screamed as Yates dove to the side, rolling behind the water trough as bullets splintered the wood around him. His return fire was precise, 2 shots that sent one of the men stumbling backward, clutching his shoulder. The next moments passed in a blur of gunfire and shouting. Willow pressed herself deeper into the shadows, paralyzed by fear and guilt. This man was fighting, possibly dying for her, while she cowered behind the barn. She hadn't always been this way. Once, she'd been brave. Before Charles Reynolds had systematically broken her spirit over 3 years of marriage, she'd been strong-willed and independent. The daughter of a schoolteacher, she'd come west with dreams of adventure, only to find herself trapped in a gilded cage by a husband whose charming facade had quickly given way to jealous rage and cruel control. A shout of pain pulled her from her thoughts. Not Yates, one of Reynolds' men, had taken a bullet to the leg and was cursing loudly. The remaining gunman was calling for a retreat, dragging his wounded companion toward their horses. "This ain't over," the leader shouted back at the property. "Reynolds wants his wife, and he always gets what he wants." As their horses thundered away, Willow finally found the courage to move. She ran toward Yates, who was now leaning heavily against the water trough, his hand pressed to his side. "You're hurt," she gasped, reaching for him. His eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, met hers. "Just grazed. I've had worse from breaking in new horses." But the growing stain of red on his shirt told a different story. "Inside," she insisted, slipping her shoulder under his arm to support him. "I need to tend to that wound." As they made their slow way to her small cabin, Willow felt the weight of what had just happened settling over her. Reynolds had found her. After 6 months of peace, of slowly building a new life, her past had caught up with her again. And now an innocent man was bleeding because of her secrets. "Why?" she asked as she helped Yates onto a chair by her kitchen table. "Why would you face them down like that? You don't even know me." He winced as she helped him remove his vest and began unbuttoning his shirt. "I know enough, Mrs. Davis. I know you're a woman living alone who deserves to stay that way if she chooses." Willow's hands trembled as she fetched water and clean cloths. "Those men work for my husband. My real name is Willow Reynolds. I figured it might be something like that." Yates drew a sharp breath as she began cleaning the wound on his side. "A woman doesn't usually change her name unless she's running from something. Or someone," she corrected, examining the angry red furrow where the bullet had torn across his ribs. "Thank God it's just a graze. Any deeper and you might have died. For a stranger." His hand caught hers, surprisingly gentle for a man who worked with horses and cattle. "We aren't strangers, Willow. We've been neighbors for months. You make the best apple pie in the territory and you sing when you think no one's listening." Heat rose to her cheeks. She hadn't realized he'd noticed so much about her during his occasional visits to help with repairs she couldn't manage herself. "That doesn't explain why you'd risk your life." Yates was quiet for a moment, letting her wrap clean bandages around his torso. "My sister was married to a man like I suspect your husband is, controlling, violent when things didn't go his way." His jaw tightened. "She didn't make it out alive. I swore I'd never stand by again if I saw a woman in trouble." Willow's hand stilled on the bandage. "I'm sorry about your sister. It was years ago, but some wounds don't heal completely." He adjusted himself in the chair, wincing slightly. "Those men will be back. Reynolds sounds like the type who doesn't give up easily." "He isn't," she confirmed, tying off the bandage. "I've run twice before. Each time he found me. Each time the punishment was worse." She couldn't meet Yates' eyes as she added, "The last time I nearly didn't survive." Yates' hand gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "You won't be alone this time." His words sent a complicated mix of emotions through her: gratitude, fear, and something warmer that she didn't dare examine too closely. She'd trusted a handsome face before, and it had nearly destroyed her. "You should rest," she said, pulling away. "And then you should go back to the Blackwater Ranch. I can't ask you to get involved in my troubles." He raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ask, I offered. And it's the Circle B Ranch, not Blackwater." "Circle B," she corrected herself. "Either way, I won't have your blood on my conscience. When they come back, and they will, I'll handle it." Yates stood, testing his injury with a slight grimace. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" The question hung in the air between them. They both knew she had limited options. A woman alone in the territories had few legal rights, especially against a husband with money and influence like Charles Reynolds. "I'll run again," she said finally. "Somewhere farther this time. Oregon, maybe, or California. Running didn't work the first 3 times," Yates pointed out. "And Reynolds will just keep sending men after you, men who might not give you the chance to run next time." She knew he was right, but couldn't see another way out. "What choice do I have? The law won't protect me from my husband. In their eyes, I'm his property." "Not everyone sees it that way." Yates moved toward the window, checking the road that led to her small homestead. "Sheriff Callahan in town is a fair man, and Judge Wilson has been known to grant divorces in cases where there's proof of cruelty." Hope fluttered briefly in Willow's chest before reality crushed it. "I have no proof except my word against his, and Charles has friends in high places even out here. Then we make a stand." Yates turned back to her, determination written across his features. "Those men will be back, probably with reinforcements. But they'll find more than just me waiting for them next time." Willow shook her head. "I can't ask other people to risk their lives for my problems. You'd be surprised what people are willing to do for a neighbor in need." He picked up his hat from the table. "I need to head back to the Circle B and tell Mr. Brennan what happened. Then I'll talk to some people I trust. We'll figure this out, Willow." She walked him to the door, anxiety knotting in her stomach. They could come back any time. They're licking their wounds right now. "We probably have until tomorrow at least," He paused at the threshold. "Lock your doors. Keep your shotgun close. I'll be back before nightfall with supplies." As he stepped outside, Willow called after him. "Why are you really doing this, Yates? The truth." He turned back, his expression softening in the afternoon light. "Because from the first moment I saw you hanging laundry and humming to yourself, I knew you were someone worth protecting." A small smile touched his lips. "And because I've never tasted apple pie as good as yours." With that, he settled his hat on his head and strode toward his horse, leaving Willow standing in the doorway with her heart beating a strange new rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. True to his word, Yates returned as the sun was setting, but he wasn't alone. 4 men rode with him. She recognized Walt Brennan, owner of the Circle B Ranch, along with 2 of his ranch hands and Sheriff Callahan from town. Willow met them in the yard, her shotgun still clutched in her hands. She'd spent the afternoon jumping at every sound, expecting Reynolds' men to return at any moment. "Evening, Mrs. Davis," Sheriff Callahan said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. He was an older man with a salt and pepper mustache and tired eyes that had seen too much frontier justice. "Yates here tells me you've had some trouble." "That's one way of putting it," she replied, glancing at Yates. He'd changed his blood-stained shirt but moved stiffly as he dismounted, his injury clearly still paining him. Walt Brennan stepped forward. A barrel-chested man in his 50s with a booming voice, he'd always been cordial but distant in their few interactions. "No one threatens a neighbor of the Circle B without answering for it, madam. My boys and I are here to help." Inside her small cabin, Willow served coffee as Yates explained the situation more fully to the men. She found her gaze continually drawn to him as he spoke, noting the authoritative tone that had the other men listening intently. There was clearly more to the quiet cowboy than she'd realized. "Reynolds is a businessman from Denver," Sheriff Callahan said when Yates finished. "Got his fingers in mining interests across Colorado. Rumor has it he's got political ambitions, too." "He's also abusive and dangerous," Willow said quietly. All eyes turned to her. "I didn't just leave on a whim. He nearly killed me the last time I tried to get away." She swallowed hard before continuing. 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, and enough bruises that I couldn't leave the house for a month." The cabin fell silent. Walt Brennan's weathered face hardened in disgust. "Why didn't you go to the law?" Sheriff Callahan asked gently. "I did. The sheriff in Denver was a friend of Charles. He told me to be a better wife." Bitterness tinged her voice. "The second time I ran, I made it to Cheyenne. Charles found me within a month. The beating was worse that time." Yates' knuckles went white around his coffee cup. "And this time you came all the way to Montana." She nodded. "I thought the distance might finally be enough." Sheriff Callahan stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Territory law is complicated when it comes to marriage, but I won't be party to sending a woman back to be beaten or killed. That said, those men will be back, and they'll have a piece of paper saying they're legally retrieving Mr. Reynolds' property." "Then we need to be ready," Yates said. "How many men can we count on?" The discussion turned to strategies and shifts, with the men planning a rotation to keep watch over Willow's property. She listened, a strange mixture of gratitude and disbelief washing over her. In 3 years of marriage and 2 previous escape attempts, no one had ever stood up for her like this. As the meeting broke up and the men prepared to set up the first watch, Willow pulled Yates aside. "I need to know what happens after," she said quietly. "Even if we drive them off this time, Charles won't stop. As long as I'm his wife under the law, he has rights to me and this property." Yates' eyes held her steadily. "There's a judge coming through Redemption Creek next week for the circuit court. Sheriff Callahan thinks he might be willing to hear your case for divorce on grounds of cruelty. And if he won't," his expression grew serious, "then we'll find another way. I promise you, Willow, you won't have to go back to him." She wanted to believe him. More than anything, she wanted to trust that this time would be different, but experience had taught her harsh lessons about hope. "I should have left for California the moment those men showed up," she said, more to herself than to him. "Maybe," Yates acknowledged. "But then you'd still be running. Maybe it's time to stand and fight instead." As he joined the others outside to organize the watch, Willow wondered when she'd stopped thinking in terms of "I" and started hearing "we" in her plans for survival. It was dangerous to rely on others, especially a man she barely knew, no matter how kind his eyes or gentle his touch. But as she watched Yates directing the men with quiet authority, she couldn't help the small flame of hope that flickered to life within her. Perhaps this time really would be different. The night passed tensely, but without incident. Willow barely slept, moving from window to check on the men keeping watch outside. Near dawn, she found Yates sitting on her porch steps, rifle across his knees, staring out at the pale sky. She sat beside him, offering a cup of fresh coffee. "You should be resting with that injury." He accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "I'll rest when Reynolds' men are gone for good." They sat in comfortable silence as the world around them slowly brightened. Birds began their morning songs, and the scent of pine and dew filled the air. "It's beautiful here," Yates said finally. "I can see why you chose it." Willow nodded. "The first time I saw these mountains, I felt like I could breathe again. Charles kept me in Denver in a fine house with servants and parties, but it was still a cage." "How did you meet him?" Yates asked, his voice gentle. She hadn't spoken of it in so long, but somehow, in the quiet dawn with this man beside her, the words came easily. "I was teaching at a girls' school. My father was a schoolteacher, and I followed in his footsteps. Charles was funding a new wing for the school, the benefactor coming to check on his investment." She smiled sadly at the memory. "He was so charming, so attentive. When he proposed after just 2 months, everyone said I was the luckiest girl in Denver." "When did it change?" "After the wedding. Gradually, at first little criticisms, controlling what I wore, who I spoke to. Then came the first time he hit me." She traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger. "I'd spoken too long to a male guest at one of his dinner parties. He waited until everyone had gone, then backhanded me across the dining room." Yates' jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "He was always careful after that, no marks where people could see, and always so sorry afterward. Gifts, tears, promises." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "I believed him the first few times. Wanted to believe my husband loved me, that it was just his temper, that I could help him change." "It wasn't your fault," Yates said quietly. "None of it." Willow looked at him, surprised by the fierceness in his tone. "I know that now. It took a long time, but I know that." They fell silent again, watching as the sun finally broke over the eastern mountains, painting the landscape in gold. "What about you?" she asked eventually. "You know my story now. What's yours?" Yates took a long drink of his coffee before answering. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Texas. My pa had a small ranch until the war took him. After my sister died, my mother followed within a year." "Broken heart," the doctor said. He shrugged. "I drifted north, worked cattle drives, broke horses. Ended up here 2 years ago when Walt Brennan offered me steady work. No wife, family of your own." She wasn't sure why she asked, but something in her needed to know. He shook his head. "Never found the right woman. Or maybe I was never in the right place long enough to look properly." His eyes met hers, warm and direct. "Until recently, perhaps." The implication in his words sent a flutter through her chest that she immediately tried to suppress. "Yates." Whatever she might have said was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. They both stood quickly, Yates positioning himself slightly in front of her as Walt Brennan and Sheriff Callahan rode up to the cabin. "Riders coming," Walt called out as they dismounted. "About 6 of them, taking the North Road. They'll be here within the hour." Sheriff Callahan looked grim. "One of them's carrying papers. I'd bet my badge they're legal documents giving them authority to collect Reynolds' property, meaning you, Mrs. Davis." Willow's stomach clenched with fear. "6 men this time." "We have 7, Yates said firmly, including her in the count. "And we have right on our side." Walt Brennan nodded in agreement. "My other boys are positioned in the trees. If those men come looking for trouble, they'll find more than they bargained for." Sheriff Callahan looked uncomfortable. "I'm sworn to uphold the law, even laws I don't agree with, if they have legal papers." "Then you check those papers thoroughly," Yates interrupted. "And while you're doing that, we make sure they understand that Mrs. Davis is under the protection of friends who won't stand by while she's dragged away against her will." The hour that followed was the longest of Willow's life. She changed into her sturdiest dress, braided her hair tightly, and loaded her shotgun. If she was going to face Charles' men again, she would do it on her feet, not cowering in fear. When the riders finally appeared on the horizon, she stood on her porch between Yates and Sheriff Callahan, her heart pounding but her hands steady. 6 men approached the property, led by the same gunman who had spoken the day before. His arm was bandaged where Yates had shot him, and his face was set in a hard scowl. Beside him rode a thin man in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the Montana wilderness, a lawyer, by the looks of him. "That's far enough," Sheriff Callahan called out when they were 20 yards from the house. "State your business." The suited man rode forward a few paces. "I am Harold Whitcomb, attorney for Mr. Charles Reynolds of Denver. I have here a legal writ authorizing the retrieval of Mr. Reynolds' wife, who has absconded with his property and money." He held up an official-looking document. "These men are authorized to return Mrs. Reynolds to her lawful husband. The woman you're looking for isn't here," Yates said clearly. "This is Mrs. Willow Davis, a widow who homesteaded this land legally." Whitcomb's thin lips curved in a smirk. "We have sworn testimony and a description that matches." "Don't make this difficult, Sheriff. We have the law on our side." Sheriff Callahan stepped forward. "I'll need to examine those papers, Mr. Whitcomb." As the lawyer dismounted to present his documents, the lead gunman's eyes fixed on Willow. "Mr. Reynolds said to tell his beloved wife that he's looking forward to teaching her the value of loyalty when she returns home." Willow felt a chill run through her at the thinly veiled threat, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I have no husband, and I am not going anywhere." The gunman's hand moved to rest on his holster. "We'll see about that, madam." Yates shifted subtly, his body angling to shield her. "Touch her, and it'll be the last thing you do." The tension in the air was palpable as Sheriff Callahan examined the papers, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "These appear to be in order," he finally said, looking up at Willow apologetically. "According to Colorado Territory law, a husband has the right to recover his wife and property." "We're in Montana Territory," Yates pointed out. "Different jurisdiction." "The full faith and credit clause applies," Whitcomb countered smoothly. "One territory must recognize the legal decisions of another." Sheriff Callahan looked torn. "Mr. Whitcomb is technically correct. However," he added, raising a hand as the gunmen began to look triumphant, "I cannot in good conscience force a woman to return to a situation where she fears for her life." "That's not your decision to make, Sheriff," Whitcomb said coldly. "The law is clear." "So is my conscience," Sheriff Callahan replied. "Mrs. Reynolds, or Davis, as she calls herself now, has alleged abuse at the hands of her husband. That gives me cause to delay any action until a judge can review the case." The lead gunman spat on the ground. "We didn't come all this way to go back empty-handed. Reynolds wants his wife, and he wants her now." "That's not happening," Yates said, his voice deadly quiet. Whitcomb studied the situation, clearly calculating his options. "Perhaps a compromise. Mrs. Reynolds could come with us to town, where she would stay under the sheriff's supervision until the circuit judge arrives next week. Then her allegations, can be properly evaluated. Before Willow could refuse, Yates spoke, and the judge will hear her petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty. Whitcomb's eyes narrowed, but he nodded reluctantly. If that's what she wishes to pursue, I can't stop her, though Mr. Reynolds will contest it vigorously. Sheriff Callahan turned to Willow. It might be the safest option, madam. My deputy and I can ensure your protection in town until the judge arrives. Willow hesitated, looking at Yates. His expression was tense but supportive. He would back whatever decision she made. The realization gave her strength. I'll go to town, she said finally. But I need time to gather some belongings. We'll escort you there ourselves, Sheriff Callahan said firmly, making it clear that Reynolds' men would not be taking her anywhere. As the arrangements were made, Willow went inside to pack a small bag, her mind racing. She had 1 week to convince a circuit judge that she deserved freedom from Charles. 1 week to gather her courage and stand up in court against the man who had systematically broken her down for years. Yates followed her inside, closing the door behind them for a moment of privacy. Are you sure about this? No, she admitted, folding a dress into her bag. But what choice do I have? At least this way I get my day in court. He moved closer, his voice low and urgent. I could take you away from here. Tonight, we could head west, find somewhere new to start over. The offer took her breath away, not just because he was willing to leave everything behind to help her, but because for a brief, wild moment she wanted to say yes. I can't run forever, she said instead, and I won't ask you to throw your life away for me. It wouldn't be throwing it away. His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. Willow, in the few months I've known you, I've come to care for you more than I thought possible. Her heart stuttered in her chest. Yates, I can't think about that right now. Not with everything happening, he nodded, understanding in his expression. I know. Bad timing. But I wanted you to know that whatever happens in town, whatever that judge decides, you're not alone anymore. She reached out impulsively, squeezing his hand. Thank you for everything. When they emerged from the cabin, Willow's small bag in hand, Reynolds' men were clearly unhappy with the arrangement but were being held in check by the presence of Sheriff Callahan and the Circle B ranch hands who had emerged from their positions in the surrounding trees. The ride to Redemption Creek was tense, with Reynolds' men following at a distance. Sheriff Callahan kept Willow between himself and Yates, with Walt Brennan's men forming a protective circle around them. The small procession drew curious stares as they rode down the main street of the frontier town. Redemption Creek had grown considerably in the 3 years since silver had been discovered in the nearby mountains. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted several businesses, a school, 2 churches, and even a small hotel. It was to this hotel that Sheriff Callahan directed them. You'll stay here until the judge arrives, he told Willow as he helped her dismount. Mrs. Henderson runs a respectable establishment. You'll be comfortable, and I'll have a deputy outside your door day and night. Whitcomb stepped forward. I must insist that Mrs. Reynolds not be allowed to leave town before the hearing, and that she not be permitted unsupervised visits. Sheriff Callahan's mustache twitched in annoyance. She's not a prisoner, Mr. Whitcomb, but I give you my word she'll be present for the hearing. As arrangements were made for her stay, Willow found herself looking at the small frontier town that would be her home for the next week and possibly much longer, depending on the judge's decision. She hadn't spent much time in Redemption Creek, preferring the solitude of her homestead after escaping Charles. Now she wondered if she should have made more connections, found more allies who might speak for her character. I'll be staying in town too, Yates said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Walt's given me the week off to help however I can. Relief washed through her. Won't your wound need tending? Mrs. Henderson used to be a nurse during the war. She'll check it. His expression grew serious. Reynolds' men won't give up easily. They'll be watching, waiting for any opportunity. Don't go anywhere alone, even with the deputy outside your door." She nodded, the reality of her situation settling over her. "You think I have any chance with the judge?" "Judge Wilson is fair, from what I hear. He's granted divorces before in cases of abandonment and cruelty." Yates hesitated, but having proof would help. "Do you have anything that could corroborate your story?" Willow thought for a moment. "Just my word, and the scars, though most have faded." She unconsciously touched her ribs where they had once been broken. Charles was always careful not to leave marks where people could see, and he made sure the doctor who treated me was well paid for his discretion. "We'll find a way," Yates promised. "Together." As they entered the hotel, Willow couldn't help but feel like she was walking into another kind of cage, one with nicer furnishings perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. Reynolds' men might not be able to drag her away physically, but the law they wielded was a powerful weapon. And Charles Reynolds had never been a man who accepted defeat. The week that followed was one of the strangest in Willow's life. Confined mostly to the hotel and the surrounding businesses, she felt like she was living in a strange limbo between freedom and captivity. Sheriff Callahan's deputy, a young man named Frank Miller, was courteous but vigilant, accompanying her whenever she left the hotel. Reynolds' men had taken rooms at the saloon across town, but made their presence known by appearing whenever she ventured out, watching her from a distance. Their silent surveillance was almost more unnerving than direct confrontation would have been. Yates visited daily, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a ribbon for her hair, fresh baked goods from the town's small bakery. His thoughtfulness touched her, as did his determination to help prepare her case for the judge. "We need witnesses," he said on the third day, sitting with her in the small hotel dining room. "People who can speak to your character, or better yet, who knew about your situation with Reynolds." Willow stirred her tea thoughtfully. "There's a woman who helped me escape Denver, Martha Collins. She was our housekeeper. She saw what Charles did to me after that dinner party. You know where she is now? Still in Denver, I think. Charles wouldn't have suspected her of helping me." Willow sighed. "But she can't possibly get here before the judge arrives. A sworn statement might help if we could get a telegram to her." Yates leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What about in town here? You've been in Redemption Creek for 6 months. Surely some people know you." She thought about it. "Dr. Miller treated me when I first arrived. I had lingering injuries. He never asked directly, but I think he suspected they weren't from a fall like I claimed." "That's good. The doctor's word carries weight. Anyone else?" Mrs. Abernathy at the general store. "I've traded with her regularly, and Pastor Wilson's wife. I've attended their church a few times." Yates nodded encouragingly. "Character witnesses are important. They can testify that you're an upstanding member of the community, not some flighty woman who abandoned her marriage on a whim." As they talked, Willow found herself opening up more about her life with Charles, the isolation, the controlling behavior, the escalating violence. It was painful to revisit, but somehow, sharing the burden with Yates made it more bearable. "How did you finally get away?" he asked gently. Willow's fingers tightened around her teacup. "After the last beating, I knew he would eventually kill me. It was just a matter of time." She took a deep breath. "Martha helped me. She smuggled small amounts of money to me over several weeks. When Charles went to Leadville on business, she helped me get to the train station. I left with nothing but a small bag and the clothes I was wearing. That took incredible courage." She shook her head. "It took desperation. And even then, I was terrified he would find me." "Which he did in Cheyenne." "How did he track you there?" "I made a mistake. I wrote to a friend from the girls' school where I taught. Charles intercepted the letter." Her expression hardened. "After he found me in Cheyenne, I learned not to trust anyone, not to reach out to anyone from my past. I came to Montana and changed my name, paid cash for my homestead, and kept to myself. Until now," Yates said quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and Willow felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the hot tea. Over the past few days, their conversations had deepened, moving beyond her troubles with Charles to share dreams, memories, and quiet laughter. She found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. "Until now," she agreed softly. The moment was interrupted by Sheriff Callahan entering the dining room, his expression grave. "Mrs. Davis, Mr. Irving, I've just received word. Judge Wilson will be arriving tomorrow morning instead of next week. Apparently, there's trouble brewing in Helena that requires his attention, so he's expediting his circuit." Willow felt the blood drain from her face. "Tomorrow, but we're not ready. We haven't had time to gather witnesses or prepare. I'm afraid that's how it stands." "The hearing will be at 10 o'clock. The sheriff looked genuinely apologetic. "I've already informed Mr. Whitcomb. He seemed pleased with the development." After the sheriff left, Willow slumped in her chair. "This is Charles doing somehow. He has connections everywhere. He must have influenced the judge's schedule." Yates reached across the table to take her hand. "Then we work with what we have. I'll speak to Dr. Miller tonight, and we still have time for telegrams. We'll send one to Martha Collins immediately." What if it's not enough? Tears of frustration burned in her eyes. What if the judge rules in Charles' favor? Then we'll deal with that if it happens. Yates' grip on her hand tightened reassuringly. "I meant what I said before, Willow. You're not alone anymore." They spent the rest of the day in frantic preparation, sending telegrams, speaking with potential witnesses, and trying to anticipate every argument Whitcomb might make against her petition for divorce. By evening, Willow was exhausted but determined. Whatever happened in the morning, she would face it with dignity. As Yates walked her back to her room, they paused outside her door. "Try to get some rest," he said, concern evident in his eyes. "You'll need your strength tomorrow." "I doubt I'll sleep much," she admitted, "but I'll try." He hesitated, then reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The gentle touch sent shivers down her spine. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Willow, know that these past few days with you have meant everything to me." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a soft, brief kiss to her forehead. "Good night," he whispered, then turned and walked away, leaving her standing at her door with her heart racing and her skin tingling where his lips had touched. Inside her room, Willow pressed her fingers to the spot, wondering how such a chaste gesture could affect her so deeply. After 3 years of fearing a man's touch, she found herself longing for Yates, his gentle hands, his strong embrace, perhaps even his lips on hers rather than just her forehead. But such thoughts were dangerous when her future hung in the balance. Tomorrow would determine whether she remained Willow Davis, free woman of Montana territory, or whether she would be dragged back to Denver as Mrs. Charles Reynolds, prisoner in her own home. With that sobering thought, she prepared for bed, praying for the strength to face whatever the morning might bring. The courthouse in Redemption Creek was little more than a large room above the town hall, but on the morning of Willow's hearing, it seemed to her as imposing as any grand Denver edifice. People from town filled the benches, curious about the drama unfolding in their midst. Reynolds' men stood at the back, their presence a silent threat. Judge Wilson was a stern-looking man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard. He called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "This court will hear the petition of Willow Reynolds, currently residing under the name Willow Davis, for divorce from her husband, Charles Reynolds of Denver, Colorado Territory, on grounds of cruelty," he announced. "Mrs. Reynolds, please step forward." Willow rose on shaking legs, acutely aware of every eye in the room upon her. Yates, sitting directly behind her, gave her a reassuring nod as she approached the judge's bench. "Mrs. Reynolds, do you understand that the dissolution of a marriage contract is a serious matter not undertaken lightly by this court? Judge Wilson asked. "I do, Your Honor." "And you maintain that your husband subjected you to cruel treatment sufficient to warrant this extreme remedy?" "Yes, Your Honor." Willow's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Over the course of our 3-year marriage, my husband beat me numerous times, controlled my every movement, and threatened my life. The last time he found me after I had fled, he broke 3 of my ribs and my arm and told me that next time he would kill me." Murmurs ran through the courtroom. Judge Wilson silenced them with another rap of his gavel. "Serious allegations, Mrs. Reynolds." "Do you have evidence to support these claims?" Willow took a deep breath. "I have the testimony of Dr. Miller, who treated me when I first arrived in Redemption Creek with injuries consistent with my account. I also have character witnesses from the community who can speak to my honest nature. And I have received a telegram from Martha Collins, formerly employed in the Reynolds household, confirming Mrs. Reynolds' account of abuse," Sheriff Callahan added, stepping forward to hand the judge a piece of paper. Harold Whitcomb rose from his seat, his thin face pinched with disdain. "Your Honor, if I may, Mrs. Reynolds has provided nothing but her word and the hearsay of others. My client, Mr. Charles Reynolds, is a respected businessman unable to leave his affairs in Denver to defend himself against these scurrilous accusations." "And what does Mr. Reynolds say about these allegations?" Judge Wilson asked, studying the telegram in his hand. Whitcomb straightened his jacket. "Mr. Reynolds categorically denies any abuse. He states that his wife has always been high-strung and prone to flights of fancy. He believes she may be suffering from female hysteria, or a nervous condition that has led her to fabricate these stories." Willow's face burned with anger and humiliation. It was the same tactic Charles had used with the Denver sheriff, painting her as unstable, emotional, unreliable. "Furthermore," Whitcomb continued smoothly, "Mrs. Reynolds absconded with valuable property belonging to my client, including family jewelry and a substantial sum of money." "That's a lie," Willow exclaimed, unable to contain herself. "I left with nothing but a small bag of personal belongings." Judge Wilson gave her a stern look. "Mrs. Reynolds, you will have your chance to respond. Mr. Whitcomb, continue." "My client simply wants his wife returned to the comforts of her home in Denver, where she can receive proper care for her condition. He is willing to forgive this episode and welcome her back without recrimination." Willow felt sick at the thought. Without recrimination from Charles meant only that he would wait until they were truly alone before exacting his punishment. "Dr. Miller," Judge Wilson called, "please step forward." The town doctor, a kindly man in his 50s, approached the bench. After being sworn in, he spoke clearly about Willow's condition when she had first come to him 6 months earlier. "Mrs. Davis or Reynolds, as I now know her, came to me suffering from partially healed fractures to 3 ribs and her left arm. The injuries were consistent with significant physical trauma, not a fall as she claimed at the time." He looked apologetically at Willow. "In my professional opinion, her injuries match those typically seen in cases of severe beating." Whitcomb pounced. "But she lied to you about the cause, did she not? How can we trust her account now?" "Many victims of abuse lie to protect themselves," Dr. Miller replied evenly. "It's quite common, especially when they fear retribution." More witnesses followed: Mrs. Abernathy from the general store, Pastor Wilson's wife, and finally Yates, all testifying to Willow's good character, her hard work on her homestead, and her contribution to the community. When it was Yates' turn, his testimony was powerful in its simplicity. "I've known Mrs. Davis for 4 months. In that time, I've found her to be honest, hardworking, and brave. No woman leaves her home and security without desperate cause. The fact that she's built a new life here, alone, speaks to her strength of character. She deserves the right to live free from fear." His eyes met Willow's as he spoke, and the warmth and admiration in them gave her courage. Whatever happened, she had found at least one person who saw her truly and valued her for who she was. After the testimonies concluded, Judge Wilson called Willow back to the bench for final questions. "Mrs. Reynolds, if this court were to grant your petition, what would you do?" The question surprised her, but she answered honestly. "I would continue to work my homestead, Your Honor. I've built a life here that I'm proud of, a life of my own choosing. And if the court were to deny your petition," Willow straightened her spine, "then I would run again, Your Honor. Because returning to Charles Reynolds would be a death sentence, whether quick or slow." The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "This court will take a brief recess to consider the evidence presented. We will reconvene in 1 hour." As the judge left the room, Willow returned to her seat, her legs trembling with nervous exhaustion. Yates immediately moved to sit beside her. "You did well," he murmured, his hand finding hers beneath the bench where no one could see. "Very well. You think it was enough?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Judge Wilson seems fair, and Dr. Miller's testimony was strong. They sat in anxious silence, aware of Reynolds' men watching them from the back of the room. Harold Whitcomb sat at his table, scribbling notes and occasionally glancing at them with thinly veiled contempt. The hour passed with excruciating slowness. When Judge Wilson finally returned to the bench, Willow felt as though she might faint from the tension. "In the matter of Reynolds versus Reynolds," the judge began, his voice filling the now silent courtroom, "I have carefully considered the evidence and testimony presented. Cases of this nature are never straightforward, particularly when they involve allegations that strike at the heart of the marital relationship." He paused, looking directly at Willow. "Mrs. Reynolds, the evidence of physical injury presented by Dr. Miller is compelling. The testimony regarding your character from respected members of this community carries significant weight, and the telegram from Martha Collins provides corroboration of your account that cannot be easily dismissed." Willow hardly dared to breathe as he continued. "Mr. Whitcomb, your client's assertions regarding Mrs. Reynolds' mental state appear to be without substantiation. The court finds no evidence of female hysteria or other condition that would render her testimony unreliable." Whitcomb's face darkened, but he remained silent. "Therefore," Judge Wilson pronounced, "this court grants the petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty. The marriage between Willow Davis and Charles Reynolds is hereby dissolved. Mrs. Davis is free to maintain her chosen name and retain possession of her homestead property." This ruling is effective immediately. A roar of reaction swept through the courtroom, gasps, murmurs, and even a few cheers from the townspeople who had come to support Willow. She sat frozen, unable to fully comprehend that it was over, that she was truly free. Yates' hand tightened around hers. "He did it," he whispered. "You're free, Willow." Before she could respond, Whitcomb was on his feet, face flushed with anger. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Mr. Reynolds will appeal this decision to the Territorial Supreme Court. I demand a stay of your ruling until such appeal can be heard." Judge Wilson fixed the lawyer with a stern gaze. "Mr. Whitcomb, your client is welcome to appeal. However, no stay will be granted. This court finds that Mrs. Davis would be in potential danger if forced to return to her former husband pending appeal. My ruling stands, effective immediately." With a final rap of his gavel, the judge rose and left the bench. Willow sat stunned, tears of relief streaming down her face as the reality sank in. After 3 years of marriage and 6 months of hiding, she was legally free of Charles Reynolds. Yates helped her to her feet as people came forward to congratulate her. Sheriff Callahan approached with a satisfied smile. "Mrs. Davis, it seems you'll be keeping that name after all." "Thank you, Sheriff," she managed, still dazed by the outcome, "for everything." His expression grew serious as he glanced toward the back of the room, where Reynolds' men were conferring angrily with Whitcomb. "Don't thank me just yet. Those men don't look ready to accept the judge's decision peacefully. We should get you back to the hotel, Yates said quietly. Pack your things and return to your homestead as soon as possible. As they made their way out of the courthouse, flanked by well-wishers, Willow felt lighter than she had in years. But Yates and the sheriff remained vigilant, their eyes scanning the street as they crossed to the hotel. "Do you think they'll try something?" she asked as they climbed the stairs to her room. "Reynolds doesn't strike me as a man who accepts defeat gracefully," Yates replied grimly. "And his men are being paid well to bring you back." A piece of paper from a frontier judge might not be enough to stop them. In her room, Willow quickly gathered her few belongings. "What now?" "Sheriff Callahan's organizing an escort back to your homestead. Walt and some of the boys from Circle B will ride with us." Yates moved to the window, checking the street below. "We leave as soon as you're ready." And then, she paused in her packing to look at him. "Even with the divorce granted, Charles won't give up easily. You know that." Yates turned from the window, his expression softening as he looked at her. "Then we face whatever comes. Together if that's what you want." The question hung in the air between them, weighted with all the unspoken feelings that had grown during their time together. Willow's heart raced as she realized the choice before her to retreat back into the safe isolation she'd built around herself, or to risk trusting this man who had stood by her through everything. "Yates, She was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Yates immediately moved between her and the entrance, his hand going to his gun. "Who is it?" "Sheriff Callahan. We need to move now. Whitcomb and Reynolds' men are gathering reinforcements from the saloon." They hastily finished packing and followed the sheriff downstairs to where several horses waited, including Willow's own mare that Yates had brought from her homestead. Walt Brennan and 4 of his ranch hands were already mounted, rifles ready. "Word around town is that Reynolds' men are planning to intercept you on the road," Sheriff Callahan explained as they mounted up. "They're saying the judge's ruling doesn't matter. They've got orders to bring you back to Denver regardless." "That's kidnapping," Willow said, her voice tight with renewed fear. "It is," the sheriff agreed grimly. "And I won't allow it in my jurisdiction, but we need to get you safely home first." They set off at a brisk pace, taking the main road out of town before cutting across to a less traveled trail that wound through the hills toward Willow's homestead. The afternoon sun beat down on them as they rode, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. After an hour with no sign of pursuit, Willow began to hope they had evaded Reynolds' men. But as they rounded a bend in the trail, those hopes were dashed. Ahead, blocking the narrow path, were 7 mounted men Whitcomb, the 6 original gunmen and several rough-looking newcomers they must have recruited from the saloon. All were armed, and none looked willing to step aside. Walt Brennan raised his hand, bringing their party to a halt 20 yards from the blockade. "This doesn't need to get messy, gentlemen," he called out. "The lady has her divorce papers, all legal and signed by Judge Wilson himself." "Mr. Reynolds doesn't recognize your frontier justice," Whitcomb replied coldly. "He wants his wife returned to Denver, that's all." "I am not his wife anymore," Willow called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "The law has spoken." The lead gunman sneered. "Mr. Reynolds pays better than the law. Now, are you coming quietly, or do we need to do this the hard way?" Sheriff Callahan moved his horse forward. "As the law in these parts, I'm ordering you to disperse and let us pass. Attempting to take Mrs. Davis against her will is kidnapping, and I will arrest any man who tries it." For a tense moment, no one moved. Willow could feel the danger crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Then, with deliberate slowness, the lead gunman drew his revolver. "We outnumber you," he said flatly. "And some of us are already wounded. We've got nothing to lose by adding a few more charges to our names." Yates edged his horse closer to Willow's. "Stay behind me," he murmured. If shooting starts, make for those trees to the right. Her heart hammered in her chest as she watched the standoff unfold. She had been so close to freedom, to a new beginning. Now it seemed it would all end here in bloodshed on this dusty trail. Last chance, the gunman called. Send the woman over and the rest of you can ride away. She's not going anywhere with you, Yates answered, his voice deadly calm. They'll have to go through me. And me, Sheriff Callahan added. And us, Walt Brennan said, gesturing to his men, the gunman's face twisted in frustration. Then I guess we do this the hard way. He raised his revolver, aiming directly at Yates. Willow opened her mouth to cry out a warning, but before any sound could emerge, a shot rang out not from the gunman, but from the ridge above the trail. One of Reynolds' men toppled from his horse, clutching his arm. More shots followed in quick succession, kicking up dust around the feet of the gunmen's horses and causing them to rear and sidestep in panic. Drop your weapons, a new voice commanded from the ridge. Willow looked up to see several more riders appearing among the Rock's men she recognized from town, led by Deputy Miller. You're surrounded. The tide had turned. Reynolds' men found themselves caught in a crossfire, with Sheriff Callahan's party in front and the deputy's men above and behind them. Faced with these odds, even the most hardened gunmen knew when to fold. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Only Harold Whitcomb seemed inclined to resist, his face purple with rage. This is outrageous. You're interfering with legal— Shut up, Whitcomb, the lead gunman interrupted wearily. It's over. Reynolds ain't paying us enough to die out here. Sheriff Callahan moved forward, collecting weapons as Deputy Miller and his men descended from the ridge. You'll all be spending some time in the Redemption Creek jail on attempted kidnapping charges. After that, I suggest you ride far away from Montana territory and never return. As Reynolds' men were disarmed and led away, Willow slumped in her saddle, the tension draining from her body and leaving her shaking with delayed reaction. Yates was immediately at her side, his hand steady on her arm. Are you all right? She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After a moment, she managed to ask, How did Deputy Miller know to come? That was my doing, Walt Brennan said, riding up beside them. Figured Reynolds' men would try something like this. Sent one of my boys back to town by a different route to fetch reinforcements, just in case. Thank you, Willow whispered, looking around at the men who had risked their lives to defend her. All of you. Well, Sheriff Callahan said, tipping his hat. Reckon we should get you home, Mrs. Davis. Been quite a day already. The remainder of the journey passed without incident. By late afternoon, the familiar sight of Willow's homestead came into view: the small cabin, the barn, the corral, and the vegetable garden she had planted in the spring. After the events of the past week, it looked like paradise. Sheriff Callahan and his deputy departed after ensuring the property was secure, taking Reynolds' captured men back to town. Walt Brennan left 2 of his ranch hands to keep watch overnight, just in case any of Reynolds' allies remained in the area. I can't thank you enough, Mr. Brennan, Willow said as the ranch owner prepared to leave. Call me Walt, he replied with a gruff smile. And no thanks needed. The Circle B looks after its neighbors. He glanced at Yates, who was unsaddling Willow's horse for her. Besides, I reckon Yates here would have my hide if I didn't help out. After Walt departed, Willow found herself alone with Yates for the first time since the courthouse. He finished with the horses and joined her on the porch as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. It's beautiful, he said, following her gaze to the horizon. Yes. She turned to look at him, really look at him in the fading light. The strong profile, the kind eyes, the quiet confidence that had never wavered throughout their ordeal. Yates, I don't know how I can ever repay you for what you've done. He shook his head. I don't want repayment, Willow. What do you want? She asked softly. His eyes met hers, warm and sincere. A chance to know you better, to see if what I feel for you is something you might feel too in time. Willow's heart skipped. After Charles, she had sworn never to trust a man again, never to give anyone that kind of power over her. But Yates had proven himself different in every way that mattered. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not of you, just of trying again, of being wrong again. I understand that. He took her hand gently in his. We can take all the time you need. There's no rush, Willow. I just want you to know that I'm here whenever you're ready. The tenderness in his voice brought tears to her eyes. You've already given me so much: freedom, safety, a chance to start over. You won those things yourself, he corrected her. Your courage, your determination, those are what brought you this far. I just helped a little along the way. She smiled through her tears. More than a little. They stood in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. Willow felt a peace settling over her that she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. For the first time since she could remember, she was truly free. Free to make her own choices, to shape her own future. And standing beside her was a man who wanted to be part of that future, not by force or control, but by invitation. A man who had faced down guns for her, who had stood by her when she had nothing to offer in return, who looked at her not as property but as an equal. Yates, she said quietly, turning to face him fully. I'm not ready to rush into anything, but I do know that I want you in my life, that what I feel for you is something I've never felt before, something good and true. The smile that lit his face was like the sunrise breaking over the mountains. That's all I need to hear, Willow. The rest we'll figure out day by day. Gently, hesitantly, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a brief kiss, soft and sweet, but it carried a promise of more to come. When she pulled back, Yates looked at her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache. Day by day, she agreed, a smile spreading across her face. Starting today. Spring turned to summer and summer to fall. The mountains donned their cloak of gold and crimson as Willow's homestead prepared for the coming winter. The garden had yielded a bountiful harvest, now preserved in jars that lined her pantry shelves. The barn was filled with hay for her small herd of cattle, which had grown with 2 calves purchased from the Circle B, and Willow herself had grown in ways she never imagined possible. The frightened woman who had arrived in Montana with nothing but fear at her heels was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. Yates had kept his word, taking things slowly, giving her the time and space she needed to heal. He spent most evenings at her homestead, helping with repairs and improvements before returning to his quarters at the Circle B. Gradually, their relationship had deepened, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect that Willow had never experienced before. Today was special, the 6-month anniversary of her divorce. To celebrate, Yates had promised her a surprise picnic in the foothills. As she put the finishing touches on an apple pie to bring along, she heard the now familiar sound of his horse approaching. Stepping onto the porch, she watched him ride up, tall and straight in the saddle, his face breaking into that warm smile that never failed to make her heart beat faster. "Morning, beautiful," he called, dismounting and securing his horse to the hitching post. "Morning yourself, Cowboy." She smiled, noting the extra saddlebag on his horse and the nervous energy in his movements. "You're up to something," he grinned, not bothering to deny it. "Maybe you ready for our picnic?" The day was perfect, crisp and clear, with just enough warmth in the autumn sun to make riding comfortable. Yates led her to a spot she'd never visited before, a small meadow nestled in the foothills with a view of both the mountains and her distant homestead. "How did you find this place?" she asked as he spread a blanket on the grass. "Been exploring on my days off. Wanted somewhere special for today." He busied himself unpacking the food: fried chicken, biscuits, her apple pie, and a bottle of wine that must have cost him a week's wages. As they ate, They talked easily about everything and nothing the upcoming cattle drive Walt was planning. The new schoolteacher in town, the letters Willow had received from Martha Collins, who had finally left the Reynolds household and found work with a kind family in Cheyenne. Any word on Reynolds himself? Yates asked carefully. He rarely mentioned her ex-husband, knowing it was still a painful subject. Willow shook her head. Nothing direct. Martha heard rumors that he's planning to run for city council in Denver. Apparently, he's telling people his wife died tragically. She smiled wryly. I suppose it's better for his political ambitions than admitting she divorced him for cruelty. Are you worried he might try again to find you? She considered the question seriously. I was at first. But it's been 6 months with no sign of him or his men. I think his pride won't let him admit defeat, so he's created this fiction of being a grieving widower instead. Good. Yates took her hand, his expression suddenly serious. Because I've been thinking about the future, our future. Willow's pulse quickened. Over the past months, she had fallen deeply in love with Yates, Irving, his quiet strength, his unwavering support, his respect for her independence. But they had never explicitly discussed where their relationship was heading. Have you? She asked softly. He nodded, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Walt's offered me a partnership in the Circle B, a small share, but it would mean I'd have a stake in the ranch, not just wages, a future there. Yates, that's wonderful, she squeezed his hand, genuinely happy for him. You deserve it after all your hard work. Thing is, he continued, the Circle B is a big operation. I'd still be living there most of the time, coming over to help you when I could, but it wouldn't be the same as now. A small knot of anxiety formed in Willow's stomach. Oh, I see. No, I don't think you do. Yates took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Unless we figured out another arrangement altogether. Willow's breath caught as he opened the pouch and tipped a simple but beautiful gold ring into his palm. I know after everything with Reynolds, marriage might be the last thing you want to consider, he said quickly. And I would understand completely if that's the case. But I love you, Willow Davis. I have almost from the moment I met you. And if you do me the honor of becoming my wife, I promise you that I will spend every day of my life ensuring you never regret it. Tears welled in Willow's eyes as she looked at the man before her, this good, honorable man, who had risked everything for her before he even knew her, who had been patient and kind, who had never once made her feel less than his equal, who had given her the space to heal and find her strength again. Yates, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Are you certain? My past is part of what made you the amazing woman you are today, he finished firmly. I love all of you, Willow, your courage, your resilience, even your stubborn independence that drives me crazy sometimes. He smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. I don't want to change a single thing about you. I just want to be by your side, through whatever comes next. Willow looked down at the ring glinting in his palm, then back up at his face open, honest, and filled with such love that it took her breath away. She thought of all they had been through together, of how he had stood between her and danger without hesitation, of the words he had spoken that day. They'll have to go through me. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was right, that Yates Irving was nothing like Charles Reynolds. That with him, marriage would be a partnership, not a cage. Yes, she said simply, joyfully. Yes, Yates, I will marry you. His face lit up with such happiness that she couldn't help but laugh as he slid the ring onto her finger with slightly shaking hands. Then he was pulling her into his arms, his kiss filled with promise and devotion. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Willow rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered, saying the words she had held back for so long. I love you so much. I love you too, Willow. Always will. They were married 2 weeks later in Redemption Creek's small church, with half the town in attendance. Walt Brennan stood as Yates' best man, beaming proudly as if he'd personally orchestrated the match. Sheriff Callahan gave the bride away, and Mrs. Abernathy from the general store wept openly throughout the ceremony. Their life together began with a blend of Willow's homestead and Yates' partnership in the Circle B. Together, they expanded her small cattle operation, eventually building it into a respectable ranch of their own. The years brought challenges: harsh winters, drought summers, and the changing landscape of the Montana Territory as it moved toward statehood. But through it all, they faced everything side by side. Willow never forgot that day when her husband's men had come for her with guns, and the cowboy who had stood between her and danger had said those words that changed her life. "They'll have to go through me." Charles Reynolds never troubled them again. He won his city council seat in Denver, but lost a bid for mayor when rumors of his violent temperament surfaced. Martha Collins, in her regular letters to Willow, reported that he had remarried, but that the new Mrs. Reynolds already looked unhappy and afraid. 5 years to the day after their wedding, as they sat on the porch of their expanded home watching their 3-year-old daughter playing in the yard, Willow leaned against Yates' shoulder with a contented sigh. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked. "If Reynolds' men hadn't found me that day, if you hadn't been there to step in," Yates' arm tightened around her. "Sometimes, but I think we would have found our way to each other eventually." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Some things are just meant to be." Their daughter ran up to the porch, her dark hair flying behind her, her eyes so like her father's, sparkling with excitement as she held up a wildflower she had picked. "For you, Mama." Willow accepted the slightly crushed blossom with all the solemnity the gift deserved. "Thank you, Sarah. It's beautiful." As their daughter skipped away again, Yates squeezed Willow's hand. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. She turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, this man she loved more deeply with each passing day. Not a single one. And it was true. The path that had led her here had been difficult and dangerous, but she wouldn't change it, for it had brought her to this moment safe, loved, and truly free.